It's October, so as a seasonal treat, we've got two very special guests from Supermassive Games, the masters of immersive horror, chatting to us about cinematic inspirations, character-led storytelling, and their upcoming title, Directive 8020. Welcome to the PlayStation Access Podcast. Hello and welcome back to the PlayStation Access Podcast, the official podcast of PlayStation UK. I am your host, Rob Pearson, joined today by Rosie Caddick.
Hello, everyone.
And two very special guests. We are very excited to be joined today by Dan McDonald and Will Doyle from Supermassive Games. Dan and Will, what an absolute pleasure it is to have you on the podcast. How are you both?
Yeah, good. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. Really good to be here. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we are going to be talking a lot about your upcoming game, Directive 8020, today. The first game in the second series of the Dark Pictures Anthology, which is incredibly exciting. But also I'm keen to pick your brains about your approach to game development in general, your approach to horror. You're a studio really well known for your amazing horror games, so I'm really keen to dig into that. But before we get started, I just want to ask, how is Directive 8020 going? How's the game shaping up?
I mean, it's coming along great. We're right in the thick of it at the moment, so everyone's very much head down. But we announced it officially at Gamescom, and we've had really good responses to that so far. So there's a lot of buzz around the office at the moment, seeing that now we've finally gone public with it. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, we've got a great team back in Guildford in the studio. Really large team, but they've got a lot of experience. There's some new people on there as well, lots of fresh blood. And they're all really excited about working in the horror space and working on the Dark Pictures. So they've enjoyed seeing us at Gamescom, and they're looking forward to watching this with everyone else at the weekend. So yeah,
amazing stuff. The first thing I wanted to ask you about Directive 8020, and I guess about Supermassive Games in general. Having seen the trailer, we get our first look at Lashana Lynch in Directive 8020, the latest in quite a long line of high caliber TV and movie talent that have been in Supermassive Games. What do you feel it is about not just that caliber of actor, but TV and film actors in particular? What do they bring to Supermassive Games, and why do you feel that is crucial to the way you make games?
Well, first off, absolutely amazing to have Lashana on board.
Yeah.
That's been a huge achievement for us, and she has been absolutely amazing. You know, as an actress, she's very much kind of somebody whose star is on the rise. She's been in loads and loads of movies recently, 007, Bob Marley, a whole bunch of films.
Matilda, don't forget Matilda.
Yeah, Matilda. And she plays the character of Young, who's one of the astronauts in our game. And yeah, she was just amazing. She brought so much to it, really threw herself into it.
Yeah, it's fun to work with these high caliber actors. I think the whole movie and TV, all the actors and actresses, they're starting to take games a lot more seriously now. Yeah. So we've been able to attract some fantastic talent over the years. Starting with Sean and obviously the previous games we've done, and Ashley, and we've had some fantastic people, BAFTA nominated, Grammy nominated. Really good talent, because they take games seriously. They see it. They often play it themselves. Their fans or their brothers and sisters and their friends are fans of that stuff. So, and they get to experience it and have fun with it. So we take what we do quite seriously, but we have a lot of fun with it, and they get to experience that fun. So it's like they get to open a little window into our world and join in. And the way that we shoot, we have all the actors on set, and Will and I have been really privileged to be a part of this, have them on set together. So they're not in a sound booth recording one-on-one. They're together, they're acting, they're seeing each other's performances. And, having someone like Lashana on board, she really elevates it. They bring a presence. They all know who she is. Often they know each other anyway, because they work together in different TV shows and stuff. And that's something we've worked on as well, raising the casting level for ourselves. So they all know who she is, but then, okay, that's some star power. That's some, gravity.
It's also interesting because we make, we make branching narrative games, which are kind of different from the sort of traditional things they're used to making. They're obviously used to making movies and TV shows where there's a linear story to it. So it's always entertaining. Our games are so big, they can't possibly be kind of off book for all of it. We send them the scripts in advance of time, so they have an understanding of where it's going. But it's only when they really get on set that they kind of understand how it all flows and fits together. So it's a kind of journey of discovery for them as well, and that can be entertaining as well. It's like when we had Sean Ashmore in Man of Medan. His character in our game, because in our game everyone can live and everyone can die, including the star actor.
Yes.
And his character can die right in the first act of the game. And he was like, "What? I'm dead now?" So, no, this is just one of many deaths we've got coming for you.
Don't go anywhere. We're not finished with you. We're going to rewind time and you're going to succeed and you get to...
Yeah, it's like with Ashley Tisdale on House of Ashes, like her character she can die, she can turn into a vampire, she can vomit up a alien parasite. So there was fun working with her, going through all these different options. And
because we're doing horror, we get to subvert what they're doing as well. So they might get to play alternate versions of themselves, or whether it's a ghost or hallucination or a monster. That's a fun space for them to play in, and we get to watch that and be part of that.
It feels very much like for a performer, they get to have their cake and eat it here. Like, I guess I'm for an actor, getting to do like a dramatic death scene, that must be an exciting thing. And when you're working on a Supermassive game, there's like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 different very dramatic deaths they have to act out.
Absolutely. And it's also, I mean, it's challenging for them. It's interesting because our games, because of the branching nature of it, we often have with our characters, they can kind of move between different outcomes, and based on like how the choices you've made, they might be really, really angry in this scene or really, really caring, and so they rely a lot on the director when we're shooting it to kind of inform them of where they are. And it's a challenge for them to get into that kind of headspace as well, as they're kind of shifting around a lot.
Yeah, give them enough context that they can do the job without worrying about it. So there's a great level of trust. On this last game, in the last 2 games, in fact, we've had this wonderful performance director called Alita Collins. She's worked with lots of famous people across the industry, lots of choreography, and Kenneth Branagh and all kinds of people. And again, she gives another gravitas to it. They know who she is, or they know her friends, and have worked with her before and stuff. And so there's a level of trust that they all have. And so when she says, well, okay, now she'll explain as much as she can, but go back in time, back to a moment before, and now we're making the choice, and now you're going to be quite angry, and this might be what's in your head. And it's quite freeing for them to just act, just play.
Sure. And I guess, is there a challenge? I know when you're creating characters in video games, it's a big collaborative process between the actor and the writers. But when you're playing a game where the player can have such a meaningful input in not just the outcome of a scene, but a decision a character may make, you could arguably say that there are multiple different versions of each character in each game. So how do you, what work do you do with the performers to make sure that their character remains consistent despite having all of these different choices that they could make in any one scene?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's really interesting for us because the characters, the way we typically kind of structure it is that the character can't dramatically change in huge ways, so that they're usually kind of existing within some sort of framework there. So yeah, it is really interesting, challenging job there.
Yeah, and I think early on at the start of the games now, we understand who the characters are, we understand what the story's going to be about, and the kind of, we might have a few different variations of how it might end. But one of the really important things for us is to understand who the characters are, not just where they're from and what race they are and what age they are and what their name is, but what their arc is, what their archetype is, and what their story arc is going to be. Not just what happens to them, but how they evolve and how they change. And that's something Will and the narrative designers that we have, they put a lot of focus on, because you want to feel like there's a journey, but that journey might be terminated. It might be that they die. But it's also, it can't just be that it's always the same, because we want it to feel different. We want you to go back and play it again. But there's also growth within them. And so we have we have a whole bunch of mechanical stuff we do. We have wonderful dialect coaches on set as well, but we make sure we have designers and people on set that are watching to make sure, looking at the flow and understanding, okay, well, that's not going to work with that other thing we did earlier, so we need to maybe adjust that or come back or reshoot it again later. Don't mess with the flow of what's happening, the magic that's happening on the set, but we've made a note of it and we need to fix it, and we'll go back and do that.
That's sort of another. Sorry, Rosie, if I'm jumping in with other
literally,
questions.
I'm just listening. I'm just like, this is great.
Please jump in if you have questions. But on this is a thing that's always fascinated me with this type of choice-led narrative. Is I guess it's someone's job, it's someone's responsibility to make sure the whole thing is consistent. Is there like some monstrous-looking line chart with all the different permutations, all the different choices? Like how do you just logistically, how do you plan a story like that? How do you keep on top of it? What are the processes that you have in place when you're making this game where all of that comes together?
So the answer is yes, there is a monstrous mind map at some point. No, we kind of initially, when we sit down to construct the story, we look at all the different branches we can get. We kind of economize around that. We use software. We have a kind of thing we call the storyboard tool, which allows you to kind of piece together the whole game with all of its branches and actually plug in drawn storyboards to that, so that you can kind of play it in a really, really rough format.
Exactly like a movie, or you'd think of serialized storyboards. Well, we've got a playable version of that with the branching.
Yeah.
We have narrative designers. We have a whole bunch of people who are all sitting down here trying to look at, okay, what if this happens in that scene? Does it make sense on this branch in that other scene? So it's a very, very long, in-depth process there.
Yeah. So when they're building this stuff, if you look at it just on one moment, the network can be really quite huge.
Yeah.
So we only look at it. We look at it at quite macro level. When you look at it, a whole thing, it's huge, and it's the number of outcomes is ridiculous. So it's a lot to manage. But we've built up some expertise in it. Will and I have been doing this for some time. We've got a great team back in the studio that know what they're doing on this front. So we've got some tips and tricks that we've learned along the way of things to do and not to do, and to make it feel like you actually have choice and that it's a real choice and it's not just fluff for the sake of it.
I guess that's sorry, Will, if you wanted to go on there. But what I was going to ask is, I guess you've got a situation where I've always considered Supermassive Games to be incredibly cinematic, and I think that's another thing that these high caliber actors bring. And as technology evolves, so much of the actor's performance can be captured in a way that was never possible in video games before. So in one way, you have this incredibly cinematic directed experience where I'm guessing you want the player to feel specific things at certain points, but also you have to balance that with giving the player enough agency where they feel like they're in control of the story and the experience. So what kind of, without sort of revealing your secrets, like what are some of the tricks you use, and how do you balance those two things and make sure you're delivering, I guess, an experience where every single person who plays it can feel fulfilled, but also you're getting across what you want to get across at the same time? Yeah,
I mean, our games are choice games, so they're always based around these kind of impossible dilemmas, and so we often start with that. We often kind of look at what is, the best dilemmas don't have any right answer. There's kind of sort of negative sides to each, and so sometimes we start with thinking up a load of dilemmas, and we kind of string a story around that. There's an interesting thing was when I was writing House of Ashes. I started, before we got anywhere, I started with one dilemma, which is from the movie Touching the Void, which is a real life story about this kind of climbing disaster where this guy fell into a crevasse and his friend was holding on to a rope, and had the horrible dilemma of, does he get pulled over the crevasse as his friend is struggling, or does he cut him loose? And he chose to cut him loose. And that was the origin of the story, where we kind of started off. When I started looking at it, I thought, could we take something like that? And then you start working back from that. So you say, okay, what would be amazing? What would be great characters for that situation? Well, what about a husband and wife? And then you kind of layer on more. You sort of think, well, what if he just found out that she's having an affair? And you kind of like
you do that a bloomin' lot. Like the amount when I played House of Ashes, there was like an affair happening, and like literally you saying that, and also just thinking about even like Little Hope. I just remember like Angela, when you're saying what are prime characters to put in these circumstances where you either want to help some characters and there's some that frustrate you as well. So but you still want to save everyone at the end of the day, but still you have those characters that you're like, Angela, will you please just be quiet for a moment? So it's never like, you never have like a smooth playthrough. It's never happy and everything's smooth and lovely. There's always a drama in the horror. I mean, horror's already a big drama, isn't it? But you always make it that there's something amiss or something that's going to spice it up. I think
there's a really important thing there about the characters we write. They have to be flawed in some way, and they can't all just be superheroes or the main character. Will talks about this as almost you're the director of the game. You're not playing one character, you're the director of what's happening. And so Angela, actually, she was one of my favourites. She was a fantastic actress. She brought so much fun and energy to the set.
She was great.
So much bite about her. But we know that those things can become fan favourites. They enjoy the snarky nature of it or whatever. But then also there has to be a core to them that's good or that you care about. And my real belief is you have to have empathy for these characters, otherwise you won't find it scary. If I don't care about you, I'm not scared for you. I'm not there. I'm not the one in danger. I'm scared for you, not for me.
Yeah.
And so we want you to, it needs to be flawed. And that's a hard mix for us to get right sometimes. But it is a real focus for us, writing interesting, deep, flawed characters that you care about.
I think it's kind of the magic for me of the games we make is that, unlike most games where you control a single character, a single avatar, our games you do control a cast, and because it's a horror, everyone can live and everyone can die. And one of the things we always look at is the game enjoyable if I go for an all-death playthrough, and it should be that's just a valid way to play. And there's not many games you can think of which let you do that, where you go, actually I'm going to go out and kill everyone. That's
psychopath. It's that actually leads to a very interesting thing about the endings have to be satisfying. Even when you have that bleak everyone's lost ending, we want you to feel like you've enjoyed that story and it's taking you somewhere. Horror often does that. You watch a movie and you think they've all survived and then nope, they're all dead, or it's all in someone's head, or whatever the twist might be, and it pulls the rug out from underneath you. We want you to enjoy that experience and feel fulfilled by that experience. And that's when you have so many different endings, that can be quite a challenge for us. But that is the challenge. Make sure that everyone's playthrough is enjoyable, not necessarily fun, filled with tension, and they're sitting on the edge of their seats and they care about these people and the awful things that are happening to them. But that's the challenge, I think.
You do a brilliant job as well with not only considering the story of one player, but Supermassive, the Dark Pictures Anthologies are all co-op as well. And when you're talking about focusing on the story of players, I have mad appreciation because you have to consider the story for two players as well, especially when you're going online and they both see different things. Famously, like in Man of Medan, when you have the scene when there's a monster, and I always remember this because I played it with my friend, and so my story was there was a monster, I was going to get it, and meanwhile I looked at my phone afterwards and he was like, what are you doing? Because we weren't talking when it was happening. So how do you, I'm guessing that just advances your branching tree of narratives and stuff. How do you go around considering two players' individual stories, but they're both the same story, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, a lot of that comes back to the dilemmas for me that, always, right from the very start of the story, we're looking at ways that characters can kind of rub up against each other, even if you're playing it in single player. And we have a system that works well for multiplayer, in that you just, if you're controlling 5 characters in single player, you can have up to 5 people in multiplayer. And if we've written the story well and everyone's got their different thorns that they're all sticking in each other, it just fits for multiplayer, because there's something great about we have a couch play mode. And that's a lot of fun to all be sitting around, the same screen. And if I have a choice that's going to kill your character or whatever, the feeling is just amazing.
And that's really quite cool to see as well. I'm trying to craft the relationships to go in a certain way, and you're doing the opposite. You're going to be snarky with them the whole time, and I'm being loving or whatever that might be. And that's actually fun for us. In Directive 8020, we're doing something different. Because this is a space mission, these are not college kids, these are not, it's not family, these are professionals. So we still have a lot of the relationship stuff, but it's a different twist on it. So, and I think that's the important thing about what we're doing with the anthology, the series. We get to do different sci-fi, different stories each time, talk about different types of horror, but different relationships, different, that's the core of it. It's a human experience. We take those humans and put them in an awful place.
in space in the middle of nowhere with some kind of well, from what I've seen from the trailer. Again, just when you're talking about the relationships and putting them in these horrible situations, you've always found a way to make the characters, like you say, we're all just human at the end of the day, but you always find something that makes the trust always kind of be unsettling, whether it is, like as you said, a hallucination or there's some sort of spiritual element going on. And it seems if you're an upcoming game, from what I've seen from trailers anyway, you're going for like an angle similar to like The Thing, where you're actually, not only now are you doubting people of what, you know, like hallucinations, is it real and stuff, but this is something that seems to be taking people. There was like a clip in one of your trailers where it's like, someone's suddenly attacking me. So I'm really curious to see how you go with like handling this new form of trust between people, actually making the monster one of the people.
No, I mean, it's interesting. Like we've had going right back to Until Dawn, we've always had fans saying to us like, "Oh, make a game like The Thing," because it just fits what we make so well. So the whole feeling of it could be any one of us,
paranoia,
and that just it fits our mechanics really well. It fits the way that our character distribution works. We've got trait systems, and stuff like that. So it's perfect for it. So it was almost natural that we were going to make it at some point. Yeah, and it's again going back to the performance for a moment. It's they're playing multiple versions themselves, or they might be, and so when you're playing it, who am I? Is that a human? Is that something else? How am I understanding it, and what am I getting from it? But yeah, love. From the moment we started this, themes of paranoia and mistrust and reality, steeped all over the story. And of course, when it does reveal itself, it's horrific, so it's got pure body horror in there as well. So.
Dan, I wanted to take it back to something you said when you were talking about wanting to create characters that you had empathy for and felt scared on behalf of and felt scared for. There's also an element of like teen slasher influenced creating characters that surely you've created characters to be deliberately annoying sometimes as well. Like there's always there's always a character in a Supermassive game that I'm like, I kind of want you to die.
The whiny one. The one you wouldn't want to be stuck in the lift with for a few hours. There needs to be variety. There needs to be a mix, and we know that some of those ones, Angela and going all the way back to Until Dawn with Emily, that some of those are people's favourites. Yeah. And actually, when I talked about arcs, when you see their arc and their redemption or their humanity, they become even more relatable. You understand them that much more. But also, it's fun to just get them killed off. We've all done. If you play these games multiple times, Will says, on the first playthrough that it's, most people tend to want to get everyone saved. They want to get through. They want to have the good ending as best they can, and they'll fail in different ways and be frustrated and upset and cry and all that good stuff. But then often people play it again and like, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, or they pick their favourites, and it's a fun space to be in. We're not doing this in real life. I'm not a murderer. I'm not interested in killing anyone, but we get to have fun with that stuff, and it's just a easy, fun space to be. Doing lots of cool stuff. Yeah, I think we have I think from the narrative side, we often just try and think of ways to amp up every situation. So making people a little bit larger than life, making people argue a bit more than they normally would, just works so well for the game. So. Yeah. Sorry. I was just going to say about that whole thing of they don't know they're in a horror game or a horror movie. Often that might even be referenced in some of the scripts we've done before. But you still want them to act human and do the right thing. But making them annoying, well, they're doing the wrong thing. Well, why are you doing that? Oh, I don't want you to do that. And that's frustration and stuff. But sometimes that's how humans act. We are not all logical. Yeah. Something's in the dark. It's quite scary. Turn the lights out. We make such fantastically beautiful environments and characters and stuff, and actually I'll sit there saying make it darker. We want you to be scared. When you can't see what's in the corner, it's more scary. We'll have an opportunity to put some light on that and see the fantastic work the team have done to make these assets and these environments and stuff, but make it darker. Take away that it's a primal fear, and that's something really cool about going into space. There's so much cool stuff we can do with that.
There's something very uniquely video gamey, isn't there, about having finished a game and then going back and playing it differently, playing it with multiple choices, seeing how all of these different permutations can sort of like unfold. And it's almost like, you know, you said it there, that first playthrough, most people would typically try and play it as well as they possibly could, try and save as many people as they could, and it almost plays out quite cinematically like a movie there. But it's like when you finish it, the video game element kicks in, and you're like, okay,
the trophy list.
Now I'm going back. I'm looking for all the trophies. I'm looking for all the different ways everyone can die. What are your opinions on that? Because it almost feels like it's two completely different experiences that you're crafting there.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's absolutely, as Dan was saying, I think we have, first playthrough is survival, second playthrough is very much what if. You know, like if I go back to that scene and I make the other choice, what would have happened there? So we want to show you, you know, we want players to experience all the cool variety in it. And yeah, third playthrough onwards is probably trophies. You know, you're trying to complete this whole game. And I think in the past we've been quite kind of ruthless with the way our games are. You know, that, you know, it's auto saving as you go along, and if you go and play it a second time, you have to start right from the beginning. And now that we're seeing how people play our games, we're more trying to kind of let the game push you a bit more towards bits that you might have missed. So, you know, there's a similar, like a great example of this was in the casting of Frank Stone with the cutting room floor, you know, where you can kind of see the whole story spread out around you. And, you know, I think that's what we're trying to do now as a studio is we've created all this great stuff, and a lot of players don't see all of it, and they're not, in some cases they're not teased about what's there. So we're doing more of that. We're doing more of the kind of finding ways to push you towards the good content. Yeah,
our fans have supported us. They've given us money, helped us to survive and make these fantastic experiences. How can we help them to play that and see all of that? You know, Will and the narrative team, they write all these fantastic choices, branches, and if you just play through it once, you only see one version of that.
Yeah.
You know, and you might be missing the Jason and Celine moment from House of Ashes, where, you know, it can play out really quite differently, but it's magical. Both versions are magical. One of them's awful, one of them's beautiful, but it's magical. And actually, how can we promote that and get people to experience both things?
I think, as you know, as developers, we always want to make sure that your first experience of playing it is amazing. You know, and we spend a lot of time trying to kind of iron out, you know, all of the problems in the story to make every different branch satisfying. But we do want you to play more. We do want you to go back and see all of the different variety. So yeah.
And just moving on to sort of like the Dark Pictures Anthology in broader strokes here. So Directive 8020, the first game of the second season of the anthology, have your goals for the anthology or your approach to the anthology changed at all since you started with the very first game, Man of Medan? Or, you know, what are your thoughts on it basically? How is that process evolving?
Absolutely. I mean, this game is a giant leap forward for us. Like we've with each of the games in season one, we were kind of incrementally increasing our feature set, but mainly it was each game is a different story. That's the big thing it is. And there's a few different features here as we go. This time we're really pushing the series forward in the way it's played. So the kind of the main thing that we're looking at is giving players much more sort of agency, much more control over their character. It's still very much a narrative game. You know, everything you love from the Dark Pictures is present, but we now have moments where you're in direct control of your character, and there are monsters in the environment who are moving around, hunting you down. If they spot you, they will chase you down and they'll kill you. And so that's a big difference for us. So we've taken all of the controls from season one and we've kind of rebuilt them from the ground up. So your character is now, it's much more supportive of kind of stealth gameplay. Your character moves in a much more fluid way. You've got much more sort of smooth camera control over them. And yeah, you'll be put in situations where your life is on the line in kind of exploration. You know, if it's worth saying, if you're interested in a more narrative experience, if the choices are what pull you in and you want more of a lean back experience, we have a whole load of kind of settings that you can tailor the difficulty and tailor the game to how you want it to be. So if you want a more laid back experience, you can play that as well.
I don't know if laid back is ever a phrase I would use to describe one of your games.
So yeah, I think Will described it really well. When we started the anthology, we had an idea that we were going to release them in quick succession, and keep our fans enjoying the games, and we achieved that. We had a game out every year for the first 4 years, and we're super proud of that. And there's different stories and different characters and different some additional gameplay within there. But we wanted to take some more time, take a step back. What's right for us? What do we want to make?
Yeah.
As well as listening to our fans and the press and everyone else about what they thought. But it's a collaboration within the studio about how best to make these horror games. As Will says, we're not leaving our fans behind. It's still a narrative horror game, but we've got new elements. And I don't want to do the same thing every day. And the great thing about having different stories is we're not. Yeah. We get to do different things, different types of horror. But also now we're doing different types of gameplay within that as well. So yeah, and the teams love doing that. They don't want to just make the same thing over and over again. So it's really quite exciting for them to get to build a spaceship.
Yeah.
We've got some fantastic environment artists that love doing hard surface work, which is different to doing forests and trees and stuff. Mm-hmm. So they get to, flex their muscles and do different things. And it's the same for the writers. They get to write different things, and the narrative designers and the audio people. So it's fun all round. But we always want to be moving forward, and we've got some great ambitions. We're going to take a bit more time, release it when it's ready, make sure we're super happy with it, and we think everyone else will be happy with it as well. So
do you see it as like a win-win both for you as a studio and for your audience, this anthology approach? So you're not locked into like a 5-6 year dev cycle, once every 5 or 6 years releasing a game. The release cadence is you, as you said, one every 4 years. That's certainly in this age of video games, quite a rare thing to be able to say you've released 4 games over a 4-year period.
Yeah, definitely. I think we want to make sure we're making the right game. You talk about doing an anthology. That's a really fun space to be in. I'll let Will talk about different types of horror, but we get to experience different things, and we're not making a sequel. In my version of the story, 3 of the characters died. In your story, they all survived. What sequel are we making? That's quite personal to me. Maybe I've only played it once, or maybe I've played it 4 times, and I've had all different endings. So we're not making a sequel to that. We get to do different things. We get to, we're all fans of horror. At least 3 of us are.
He loves it.
Yeah, he loves it as well. All 4 of us are fans of horror. But I'm not a fan of just The Conjuring, or just the Poltergeist, or just Jaws. I'm a fan of horror, and that entails all different kinds of horror. And so, we believe our fans are like that as well. They want to experience different things.
I think that when we're going back to the beginning of the anthology, we kind of sat down and thought, within the world of horror, what is there? And we kind of looked at the genre itself and all of the different subgenres that you have, and I think we counted 39 different subgenres. Each of which we could tell stories in, and we've had this kind of backlog of ideas going back years now, of stories we'd like to tell. And I think we started along that course, but then we now started really thinking, well, what are the games we want to make as well? What is the mechanics we want to develop? So we're pushing more towards, we're experimenting with survival horror, or narrative survival horror, I guess is this area we're in now. Enabling the development of new features to better tell the stories that we want to tell, I think is a big thing.
I mean, there have been certainly sci-fi elements to some of your previous games, but with Directive 8020, it immediately, just from looking at the trailer, you're like, okay, sci-fi horror. What is it? I mean, sci-fi is one of those other genres that you could probably find 40 or 50 subgenres in, but in particular, that sort of being alone in space against some kind of unknowable, terrifying alien enemy. What is it about those 2 genres specifically, sci-fi and horror, that you think sit so well together?
I mean, I find space absolutely terrifying.
Likewise.
I've always, everyone's like, oh, when you're a boy, you want to be an astronaut. No, I don't want to at all. I think there's something absolutely terrifying about the massive, cosmic size of the universe, and it's all death out there. There's no air. We're not supposed to be there, and you're in this tiny little tin can with just a few inches of steel between you and oblivion. It really struck me when I was a kid. Actually, I remember I went to the Science Museum in London, and they've got one of the Apollo modules there, and it was behind this barrier, and you're not supposed to go past it, and I really wanted to touch it, and I remember hopping over the barrier and going over and touching it, but the moment I did, I looked inside, and I was really terrified, because like looking in, there's like 2 or 3 astronauts shoulder to shoulder in this little tiny thing which has been up into space, so, and I remember just getting the shivers then. So it's kind of, that's always stuck with me. Space, like sci-fi horror, also has kind of like, as well, ignoring aliens for the moment, it has terrible disasters. If you look at all these movies, there's always something that happens with decompression or systems failing around you, which is horrifying in a different way. And then the creatures, there's, so I can't remember who said it, but there's the likelihood of us discovering life out there that is friendly is much smaller than the likelihood of us discovering life that is hostile. And that's just, I think, something really chilling, that the thought that we could venture out into the universe, ambassadors for the human race, and we come across something that wants to just eat us. It's a horrifying thought.
Yeah, and you think about that on a human level. What do we do to survive? All creatures, they consume to survive. Well, okay, we're going to find something. It's going to be consuming things. And are those things us? But I love it. Every time Will talks about that, I was waiting for him to say tin can, because we talk about this a lot, and I just love that idea of a thin sheet of metal between me and death. I think that's fantastic. And also, okay, once you're out there, we've seen it in movies and stuff. You're disconnected from that spaceship, floating away. Can you get back? No. What an end! What an awful end! It's drowning, but without the water. It's really quite primal.
Yeah, I think that's also isolation. Like, so much great horror is, whether it's set in a hotel up in the mountains or, on an oil rig or whatever, out in space is the furthest you can get from safety. You're really on your own. And I think that just hits something primal with us. Yeah,
there's a reason why, in any movie or game or whatever, the phones go out straight away. There's no phone signal, or the communication system goes down, because it's more scary to be alone. And you find you've got your crew around you, but then they spread out and do their work. On these astronauts doing their work on the ship or wherever they might be, and so you're alone again. That's really quite primal as well.
I think we have something in Directive 820 that's interesting, where the stakes are really, really high. Where in our story, Earth is dying, and we're looking for a new world to colonize. And so this is this really important mission, this colony mission, going out to discover and terraform this planet, which is going to save the whole of humanity. So if they fail, it's the worst thing ever. So that really, really amps it up. I was saying earlier about taking every situation and trying to dial it up. Every bit of this story is like that.
Wow, it's looking from the trailer, you've already name checked The Thing, and I think from the trailer it's apparent that there is some form of shape-shifting being that is assuming the form of your main character. Are there any other movies or TV shows or even video games that have influenced and inspired you when making Directive 8020?
So we're very, our games are very cinematic, so we mainly look towards movies, and the field of sci-fi movies is pretty big. Definitely John Carpenter's The Thing is the big one for us, but other movies like Sunshine, I don't know if you've seen that, is
the Cillian Murphy film. Yeah.
That's another one where it's a similar kind of premise of a crew going on this mission to kind of, they're trying to reignite the sun. That was a good one. Event Horizon is with Sam Neill in it. 90s movie was really good at kind of doing the sort of horrible cosmic horror. Well done.
Unknowable. Yeah. And there's so much within that the twisted nature of forms and how you can twist a body and make it different and make it, there's something wrong about it, and that's quite unnerving. Yeah.
And I guess has your it's a shift in genre, I think, for you. Has your approach to how you structure the game changed because of that? You've already mentioned you've seen this as like a step forward from any of the games you've made previously. But one of the things you've talked about is isolation. Another thing that I find terrifying about these kind of sci-fi movies are those long stretches of nothing happening, just slow ramping tension. So in terms of like the pacing, have you looked at changing how you work that? You know, how has the shift in genre changed your approach to storytelling, if at all?
We've tried to actually keep the pace on this one fairly intense. Actually, like there's you know, we really wanted to kind of hit the ground running on this story. So it's quite kind of action packed as you go through it. And we've also, like I mentioned, with having kind of real time threats in the environment has changed fundamentally how we structure the game. So that's been really, really interesting. We have kind of a mixture of sort of cinematic branching narrative scenes mixed in with more moments where you're moving around under threat or exploring. And one of the things that we've done a lot to support that is we've developed a whole bunch of tools that a player has access to, which we kind of began to experiment with a little bit in The Devil in Me, but we've really pushed forward now. So when you're exploring, you've got kind of like a whole load of tools based around this sort of wrist-mounted utility strap, and you can kind of you can scan the environment for electronics, which allows us to do kind of rewiring puzzles and stuff like that. You can also kind of detect enemy movements. You've got messengers that let you speak to the crew and stuff like that. So we've really taken that kind of what we call exploration side of the game and made that much, much more involved. So yeah, that's really changed the way we've done it.
Yeah, lots of prototyping on the team, and you know, iterating, and you know, lots of different fun experiments that the team have done and worked up. But all these things that Will talks about, they sound quite different, but they still fit within the Dark Pictures that we're making. You know, these are choices that you're making about how you play the game and how you interact with it. It's not a hardcore puzzle game. You know, we're not making that. It still fits within this cinematic universe that we're building, a cinematic story, cinematic feel where you care about the characters and relationships, and then we scare the crap out of you.
Yeah, I think there's something about the monster that's really interesting, that, you know, it's no huge spoiler to say that it will infiltrate your crew and it will pose as you and try and manipulate you. So on the kind of narrative side, on the more cinematic scenes, you have moments where there's a lot of trust going on and, you know, difficult choices you're making there. But when it does reveal itself, it turns into this ghastly monster that can, you know, hunt you down. And so on the kind of exploration side of the game, you're having sections where you're up against that, and it's, you know, it's much more sort of intense in those bits.
I can already picture it already. As soon as you said, oh, you can scan the room and look for like puzzles and things, I thought, no, because that means because you did this with like The Devil in Me, when it's like, yes, it's a lovely puzzle, but you're gonna die if you don't solve it. So already I'm just like, right, okay, we're gonna be hunted down or something. I've got like 5 seconds to figure out this puzzle, and the stress levels are just gonna go high in the sky, and the adrenaline's gonna be picking up as well. So already with you talking about this, I'm like, oh, here we go.
Yeah, and I think, you know, having these puzzles, but then also having the threat around you all the time. You know, this is something that we were pushing for. We were trying to do some of this in House of Ashes. We did a few little bits and pieces, and it was something we were trying to explore in The Devil in Me, but for a whole bunch of reasons, it didn't end up in there. And so, you know, you have direct control of the characters. You know, that's the big difference between us and a movie, when we're trying to scare you and you know, make you jump out your skin. So you feel it much more because you've got the control in your hand. But now there's actually something there. It's not just in a cutscene that you're controlling, whatever. No, now you're actually trying to hide from something or move away from it. And is it round the corner? How does this creature move? What's its motivations? What are its abilities? Because it's not human. It's different from us. So yeah, that we can play on all that kind of stuff. To then, okay, well, do I want to move? You know, it becomes that kind of primal fear of, okay, if I move, am I in trouble?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of fun tools for us to play with.
I've always been fascinated about that kind of thing you get in horror games, where, as you say, you've got to solve a puzzle, you've got to do something. Like, you know, my natural instinct is just to hide forever, but there's always the next goal you've got to complete, the next room you've got to get to, the next person you've got to save, the next puzzle you've got to solve. And in these situations where you're playing a horror game where there may be something out there hunting you down, you don't know where it is, you don't know where it's going to come from next. What sort of like developer behind the scenes tricks are there that you use or deploy to make sure that the tension is always at that perfect sort of balancing point between, you know, the player being scared enough that they want to hide, but compelled enough by the story that they're determined to sort of like push on through it, and like achieving that sort of like sweet spot must be incredibly difficult.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that it's interesting. I think when we're making our games, we have kind of like, you know, what we call the pillars of our design, and for us, we have discovery and survival, and you're kind of trying to do this dance between the two of them. You know, our games have plots which are very layered, and part of the fun of them is kind of uncovering those. So, you know, going and finding clues is really important for us. But at the same time, you're trying to keep everyone alive. So you know, objectives are a good thing to do. Like, there's a sort of horrible inevitability to the way our stories play out, where you know that you can't stay where you are because the ship's going to explode, or whatever.
Yeah.
You've got to go and do this next thing, you know. So and you always know you're going to go down that dark tunnel at some point, you know. So,
you've avoided it for so long, not anymore.
And there's kind of a mechanical version of what, you know, we plot these things out. We have beat maps, we have charts, we have real learning that we've research we've done, and learning we've done into the horror games and horror genres. But then there's an art to it as well. You know, and that's the panache that our team puts across that, the sprinkling of the new ideas of how we can scare you, or how we can, you know, raise that tension, or how we can psych you out that scare's not happening. You know, we bring the level up and bring it down, and then actually just forget about it, but now scare you in a few minutes later.
We always had this kind of mantra right at the beginning of, like, you know, what would a horror movie do? That's, you know, obvious thing, but it's quite useful, because so often when people watch a horror movie, they're like, no, don't do that. Why would you do that? And the great thing about our games is we put the controller in front of you and say, well, what would you do? And we often find that people do exactly what they do in the horror movies.
They split up.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't go into the basement.
Exactly.
Why would you go into the basement?
So we play on that. And I guess the kind of one thing we love doing is creating moments where you know something horrible is going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, so like in House of Ashes, we had the bit where Salim, you know, crushes the monster underneath, you know, a truck falls from the ceiling, crushes it, and then he has to pick up the panels one by one, you know, and you're just like, it's gonna be under there, it's gonna be a lot, you know. People still keep pressing a button, you know.
I think this leads into a question I wanted to ask, which is something I think of whenever I think of a Supermassive game, is jump scares that always seem to get me. You've touched on it a little bit there, I think, but how do you craft the perfect jump scare?
Well, jump scares are really interesting for us, because you know, you can have too many of them, you can have too few. People love them, we know that, and so we're always trying to get that kind of balance right. And we have a sort of a best practice, you know, for it. There's a whole load of kind of techniques that you can use. One of them is you always try and build up tension, usually through audio, and then you kind of have the moment where you think it's going to happen, and then you do it just after that. And usually the way you land that is by having something kind of distract your eye line. So, you know, if you open the cupboard and you look inside and you see that object there, we put something interesting that your eye is going to go, oh, what's that? And just
you
as
did
your
that
eye
in
goes
Until Dawn brilliantly.
the thing jumps at you. And it's interesting in a game compared to a movie, because in a game you have some degree of control.
Yes.
So, you know, we play a lot with stuff of when you move the stick in a certain direction.
Right.
You know, so that's exactly as I described. You have the whole thing where it's like, okay, now it's just sitting there until you look right, and then bang, we hit you with it.
That's the thing, like you know, the horror movie trick of a character looking for something, and you think it's gone away, they breathe a sigh of relief, and you know they're about to look to the other side of the frame. But film can use the frame, the camera, as like a device in crafting these jump scares, which I guess it's much more challenging in video games when you don't have direct control as developers of where the player is going to be pointing the camera at any one time. So like, you know, how do you sort of get around those challenges?
So we did used to have direct control of that camera. We did used to set those up and have that, you know, quite very cinematic style. But that's something we want to go away from, or we've been away from for some time. So there's loads of tips and tricks that we have about how we moderate that and how we make that work. Often it's about subverting the expectations. You know, it's not just happening for the sake of it, but it's, you know, it's being triggered by something you've done as a player. But you know, that's the thing. You know, we have a formula, but we always have to try and subvert that formula because people can see through that. And these jump scares, they have to be earned. You know, otherwise it feels cheap, and then that's when our fans get annoyed with them. You know, it's just too many, or you know, they get sick of them. You know, for us, it can be quite hard because you become immune to them. You know, I'm sure if I put on the right movie, I'll jump out my skin. My wife will tell you all about it. I make her jump because I jump, and you know, whatever. But yeah, working within those things, you become quite immune. So we have to test for that. We have to bring in new eyes, fresh eyes. Not our younger brothers and kids and stuff like that. They're too young for that stuff. But you know, fresh eyes, different people. Make sure that we are getting the right level of horror and the right way of doing it.
That's interesting. Also, some very classic techniques work, and we use a lot. Like fake outs are really good, where even it can just be audio. Like if you're walking along down a corridor and you get a tension riser go up and then it just stops, you know, and if you keep doing that throughout your game, you're lifting people up and keeping them on edge, so that when you do get them, it's always going to work. I think really big thing for a jump scare, or really any sort of scare, is they never really work if you're not prepared for them. You know, the viewer or the player has to know that a scare is coming. You know, and they only really work then. So however you might subvert it, you always have to be in the zone. You know, the game, you always hear that musical note or something that comes in where you're like, oh, here we go. Or
you're doing that like heart monitor, trying to keep calm. I have noticed you guys love putting them in, and then it's just when you're high on anticipation.
So I just want to touch on something Will said there as well about the tension rising. And again, we map this out and we try and understand it in great detail, but we can't keep you up there. It wears you out and it's too much. You know, and as fun as it is to be in there in that moment, we need to calm you down again. Sometimes that's a moment of levity, you know, making you laugh, and you know, I'm safe, or that was just like Will said about a fake out, something silly, or it was a squirrel, or it was a rabbit, or whatever the hell it was. We need you to calm down.
Yeah, that's why comedy works so well for horror. You know, that you can. You know, a joke is the best way to kind of pull you out of it sometimes.
That's why so often after watching a particularly horrible horror movie, I'll have to watch some stand-up comedy quickly before I go to bed. Otherwise I can't deal with it.
Put on a Disney cartoon or Simpsons or something, you know, just chill out, relax. No more death.
Talking about jump scares, sorry to sort of go off the rails a little bit here. Can you remember any jump scares that have got you personally from either TV or film? And are there any that stick out in your mind as that was a really good one?
So I want to jump in and talk about The Exorcist 3. You know, we were talking about this earlier today. In fact, it's set up so well in the hospital, and you know, there's some policemen around, and there's a nurse, and she hears a noise. She goes in the ward, comes, checks around, comes back out, shuts the door. Looks like she locks it. I can't remember if she locks it or not. It's been a while since I watched it. And then as she walks away, bam! The doors fly open, and I literally jumped out of my seat, fully a foot in the air. I'm sitting there watching it with my dad, and he just did not flinch, did not move. And I'm like, what? And and actually that's when I had the discussion. Why are you not scared? And he's like, these people are idiots. And that's why I'm sitting there engrossed in this movie and care about these characters, and literally jumped out of my seat.
The other thing that you've spoken about, as well as jump scares. And just getting the player to a point where they feel scared, but also like a key element in that is having like an amazing monster, an amazing creature. So do you have any sort of are there any supermassive rules or pillars for creating the perfect horror monster?
Don't have rules.
We always try and kind of subvert our creatures a little bit. Like we always, there's a sort of. We always ask, what would a supermassive version of this be, and what does that mean? I guess it's something that kind of makes sense. It's got a sort of grounding in some form of truth, but it's slightly different from what you'd expect. There's also when when crafting creatures, I always there's a brilliant interview with Guillermo del Toro where he talks about how obviously the more you see a creature, the more your fear of it diminishes.
Yes.
So there's a whole load of techniques about spreading it out. But what he specifically talks about with monster design is you want to change the form of a creature. So it kind of, you see it in one way, like, oh, I get it, but then it mutates in another way. For us in Directive 8020, that's brilliant. We've got a creature that literally changes shape. That's what it does, and it has some horrific forms. But a great example he was talking about was the xenomorph from Aliens, where it starts off as a scuttly thing that implants the seed inside you, and then that turns into the chest burster, and then it grows into another creature, and even when it opens its mouth, there's another mouth inside it. So trying to find ways of shaking up the form of something is important for us.
Yeah, and so we do a lot of fantastic production design and concepts, a lot of iteration with that group and trying to make what we think is the perfect monster for each of our games. But then oftentimes you have to get that in game, get it in software, get it animated, run some tests, try some stuff. Is it working? Okay, let's make it more horrific. Let's try something different. Let's try something else. We did that. Will talks about the vampire, and how that's, it's sound based, but it doesn't have eyes because it doesn't need them. Well, actually, that needs eyes. For it to look like something that we recognise as a shape, as a face. We directed the team to put a load of that stuff in. Also, the really cool thing about the character art team, we have to put them in the corner. They have to be away from everyone else because some of the stuff that they have on their screens is so damn horrific. Even not really so much anymore. Real world reference. I can't speak. But movie references and other references and different concept designs and stuff. It's just horrific. So we can't let visitors see that stuff. Even some of the team.
Amazing.
Most of the team are fans of horror, and but not all of them. And so they don't really want to see that all the time. And different bits of gore and blood and guts and stuff. So that's a core part of what we do. And we always get them to push further. Get them to experiment and try new things.
Amazing. Just to sort of ask you both sort of slightly more personal questions, I guess, about your experiences that you've had with games and horror growing up. So what are some of the games for you that you most remember vividly from your childhood, or like a seminal gaming experience for both of you?
So many, but for me, I guess one of the first games that really kind of sucked me in was a game called Ultima Underworld, which was an old RPG, but it was one of the first person ones, and it was actually one of the first games where it wasn't like a load of the kind of dungeon games back then where you click a button and you kind of jump forward and flick through. This was the first one that was fully 3D, where you had a torch and a sword and you were kind of exploring this dark, horrible dungeon, and that was when I was a kid. That was me. That sucked me in completely, and it was the first time I played a game where I was like, that has transported me properly to another world, which games do so well now.
Yeah, so on a similar vein, the Blood Witch for me, but also that was very much you click forward, you move forward a tile. But the cool thing about both of those games is, even though it's a dungeon and there's skeletons, goblins, whatever the hell that was, actually has jump scares in it, because when you feel you've been in this corridor before, you're safe, you've killed everything, and then you come around a corner and you turn left and there's a monster there, and okay, bam. But for me, back being kids, Turricane 2, bombastic platform shooter, Rick Dangerous, jumping around, silly sound effects, just bombastic sound and noise, and some of that stuff was fantastic. That's a long time ago. We play a lot of new games, and you've got to keep up with it all. And we've all got ridiculous libraries of games we've played for half an hour, and
the backlog.
The backlog is real.
Yeah.
We all feel it, right?
Yeah. Oh, no, but I'm old. That's the problem. I can remember when I was a kid. I grew up in a seaside town, and where there was arcades. Grew up in Newquay in Cornwall, and they had loads and loads of gaming arcades. And I was a little arcade rat. I was in there all the time playing all this stuff.
Oh God, Double Dragon, Bubble, those games.
I remember there was one game called Black Tiger, which I could, on one credit, I could play for like 10 or 15 minutes, which was a long time in an arcade. And yeah, that was brilliant. Yeah.
Can you remember a game that made you think, or a moment in your life that made you think, I want to do this for a living. I want to be making games. Can you credit that to a video game in particular?
I can. I personally, I can thank my mum for it. Where I was when I was a teenager, I was really, really hooked on a couple of things. I was really hooked on the game Doom, and I like pen and paper role playing games. And I was playing this game called Call of Cthulhu. And my mum cut out an article from the paper when I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life? And she cut out an article which was an interview with Sandy Peterson, who was the level designer on Doom, but was also the creator of the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and it was just him explaining what he did. And I always thought back then that to work in games, you had to be a programmer. And his whole article was about how he wasn't a programmer and how he got this great... And I hadn't even thought that you'd have a game designer, and so that set my course, and that was the job I was lucky enough to get.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, we feel really privileged to be, well, in the games industry, but also working somewhere as awesome as Supermassive Games. I was playing Populous and Paramonger and a whole bunch of stuff by Bullfrog when I was 14, 15, 16, and I was lucky enough to get a job at Bullfrog many years ago now. Peter had already left at that time, so it was a different environment. EA had already bought them. So I worked on all kinds of driving games and Burnout and all kinds of stuff, and absolutely love working in the games industry. But getting to work on horror games, again, it's relationships, it's stories, it's human stories, but also we get to, I love watching this stuff, I love talking about this stuff, and I get to build this stuff, or see the teams build it and be a part of that great experience. So it's a real privilege for us.
What is it about horror that you think is so special? Like, there's so many fans of horror, and when you think about it, it's like, why do people enjoy being scared? But what is it about this genre that you think is so compelling? I guess for you personally as well.
I think you can turn the light on afterwards. It's
not real.
Yeah. We've all sat there. We were watching The Shining with my mates, and we were all sitting there with I'm not going to put my feet on your sofas, but our feet on we're all sitting there separate in the room. And then all of a sudden we're all on the same sofa with our feet on the sofa, what's behind the door kind of thing. And it's a great fun shared experience. You get to talk about it afterwards, you get to be scared together, but you're safe. We're not, this is not a war zone. This is not horrific stuff happening. This is, you get to experience something different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's, all stories are about putting you somewhere else. They're about transporting you into another life or another world. And horror often just lets us play out these kind of, what if the worst thing possible happened? And there's something kind of perverse inside us that is always thinking that. Yeah. What's the worst thing? And so it's fun to kind of imagine in our heads, what would we do in these terrible situations? And yeah, like you say, in the safety that it's not actually happening to you. I think that's fascinating.
Amazing stuff. Well, Will, Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you both. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Best of luck with Directive 8020. We can't wait to play it when it finally comes out. Can't wait to be terrified.
Oh, I can't wait. I cannot wait.
It's going to be amazing. So Directive 8020 2025 is heading to PS5. Let us know if you're looking forward to the game, if you'll be picking it up, if you're going to be planning on doing a kill everyone playthrough on your first time or saving that for a bit later. I love a kill everyone playthrough. Yes. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, for listening. Join us in another 2 weeks' time and we'll be back with another episode of the PlayStation Access podcast. We'll see you then.
PlayStation